Okay, this is the last part of Maidstone. There's been quite a lot on this one, but I want to just end with the conclusion or reflection on my work. This time I actually have notes, so if I look down, I'm looking at them, not at my feet. What I've actually done this project has been quite good. The work's been very productive and it's been very fast, but I should always reflect and say where the issues have been, because nothing is ever perfect. The points that went wrong were really just the TV case, some of the things on construction, and teamwork possibly. It's hard to determine because I've worked so rarely in large groups, but it is something that is difficult to determine perfectly because of how we're fragmented into sections, how groups are being moved, and how fluid the project is, and then how rigid the actual units or sections that we do inside of it are meant to be done formally. But before I get to that, I'm going to start off with the good stuff. The best things were probably the actual time constraints and how well that has gone, how the work is actually being produced, and the finished product is quite good in itself, as well as what I've actually learned. It's more experience, and the more that I gain, the better off what I do should be done. So, starting off from the list, the first thing is to contextualize the project and summarize it. So, how has it gone in all? It's gone very well. I mean, there are bad things, as I've just mentioned, but it's how we've dealt with them. So there were bad things with everything, but all the good things have been achieved by overcoming it. So a lot of the materials and a lot of problems that I mentioned in my formal write-up for the entire project are stuff like the time and how we couldn't, or I didn't write up that we couldn't actually order materials from companies, and that's why it took so much time. All the wood that we ordered couldn't be ordered from Wicks, or we couldn't look at competitive pricing to get the materials. It all had to be ordered from Wilko's. This means that the price actually, if you sneak a glimpse inside the paperwork that Gary has from ordering it, it's about... Gary's one of my tutors. I probably shouldn't make that clear, but where it was ordered from Wilko's rather than Wicks, it ended up being about 3 times as much, because the university doesn't have a policy to order from any company. It only has an accredited list or a suppliers list that it allows large orders to be placed with, and this is quite refining on actually getting the materials. I mean, there could be other suppliers of paints that would be of an equal quality, but we can't go for them because that is what's happening. Plus, a lot of the paints that are ordered from not Wilko's but specialist suppliers that are based in London, and they're super saturated colours, so they are very strong, and then they're diluted down with water and we can use them to paint. The build process was, again, it was good, but there were issues. So a lot of the measurements or the wood itself had very slight warptation in it, and this meant that the wood would end up being off when it was joined onto other materials, meaning that there was a lot of finishing to do at points and a lot of filling and sanding, but it wasn't that bad compared to making something from scratch. There wasn't a drastic amount, it was more join lines and hiding stuff, so it was a very, very fine finish, which the painting teams did do a very good job with. The other side of construction was actually laser cutting. There was at least 3 large sections of the set that were entirely made from being laser cut and CNC'd machined. This was done by going straight off the technical plans that Tanuke normally referred to as T because it's easier than the longer name, really did a lot of work doing a lot of the design files for that, and did all of the actual technical drawings that I was working from for this project. I've accredited her in the actual documents where they're printed out from, although I have helped with numbers, cutting lists and materials like that, because where we can give the technicians a cutting list, because we can't use the table saws, and for the first half of the project I wasn't even allowed to use the wall saw to remove or to start to break apart the big sheets of material into the pieces that we then use. I think the largest thing that we had was an 8-foot strip of material, and even that needs to be cut because there are no other saws in the workshop that really can manage it, unlike the band saws, which are for much smaller material. The setup and the transport of it was very good. I would say that the transport to it could have been slightly better, because there was ways of packing it slightly more tightly, but in the same way that you can do that, it's then a case of packing it that tightly could bring problems of how much space is left for other things to go in. So the actual signs and parts that are put in could get knocked or marked or damaged in some way, which would really be a shame, because a lot of them are very difficult to repaint, as they were gradient colours, which means you need every single colour in that gradient, or you need to be able to blend and mix and really have a detailed painting job to fix up any marks. So transporting it there was led by Gary, the tutor, who helped pack the van, and it was very well done, but it was possibly slightly more spaced out. On the way back, he actually made a comment of, have we got everything? Because I actually packed the van, or I led packing the van, and all the boards were pushed tight against the side to fit them in, all the frames were put in tighter, and everything was done in a way where it was more compact, meaning that the van actually had enough space to fit probably another plinth, a chair and a few other bits that could have been put in as well, which isn't bad, because we all got in the van and it never really made a problem. And it made a really nice finish when you have stuff flush to the door and you don't pack it in like that, because it means it doesn't need strapping down as much. All the items were still strapped down and it was still packed in, but it was a slightly more open packing system inside of that. Nothing got damaged on the way there, and it went up very nicely when we actually got there coming out of the van. The panels themselves we inherited from previous projects for TV production and stuff like that, and they are good and bad. A lot of the panels are distorted and warped and aren't perfect. It would be much better if they were made from heavier material, as they are repeatedly used and abused by students. Rather than using 1x3, use something stronger like a 2x3, so that there is a rigidity there that will last through multiple uses. However, it also means that you can bend it and you can join the panels together very easily. Along the back of some of the join lines, we also used duct tape to seal them up. That means if any light bleed did happen, which would have shown up the marks much greater, it didn't, because there was a covering behind it, which meant that the light wouldn't come through. Also, in the same way, where we had a doorway but nothing behind it, we then had to put up some very big black screens with clamps, so that there was no viewing through the doorway to see that there was set the other side, or all the little niggly bits of what was behind it. It meant that it blacked it out, which is good, but it's something that possibly should have come up in the design. We have a doorway, but we have nothing on the other side. What would be best is to talk with the studio or the actual production company and say, is there blacking out to put a black up here so we can't see past that point, or do we need to provide that too? On the same front, it would have been nice if the budget could have been slightly larger to accommodate for acquiring an actual floor that would have fitted with it, to fit out more parts that go into it, and to develop it more. Stuff like we couldn't go there, or we only had about a couple of hours to set up in that space because of the actual film crews coming into practice for the next day. We did also have problems with it then joining, so we couldn't paint over joins, or we couldn't gum strip, and we couldn't work like that. But even if we did, the painting problem yet again occurs of you would have to probably spend at least maybe an hour, you'd at least spend half an hour matching the gradients on those sheets to actually blend in what you paint in. It isn't just a matte simple colour. It was a very good paint job that they did, which encountered problems of trying to then cover up holes or issues with the setup at the other end. The other thing that would then have fixed that is if we'd actually gone in before and set up the entire set as one space. This is something that I would like if the university could do, but I doubt it will do, as it would need many times more floor space to actually have these full suite of sets with everything laid out, set up in almost a month before, so that it can be worked on as is, rather than being judged to be okay, it's got to be put together on site rather than pre-loading, which would be nice to actually work on it where they can all be set up together, and then you can not have problems where there's joins, or you can actually plan to separate them in such a way where you can rejoin later. The second point in the reflection is, what was the space actually used for before, and how is it set up for what we've done in it? It's much better set up than the projects that I've worked on before. It is set up perfectly for lighting, shooting, and for companies to come in and set up sets for film. It is completely made for film shows. I would say if it was a large one, to move the set back more towards the back wall, which would then get rid of some of the problems with blacking off areas, and it would mean there'd be a large audience. However, for the size of audience they had and how it was laid out, it was fine. But what I would also say is to actually have the lighting companies come in and have a hour or 2 hour meeting before, or to have a plan sent over to them by us of how it is to be lit and with what lights we think best to light it with, colours, brightnesses, etc., so we can actually send a plan of how to light it, or the TV production students can send a plan of how to light it. Both of these things would mean that the lighting companies wouldn't have 6 hours-ish to come up with a plan, work out what flybars they were using, put the lights up, and work around us actually installing the set at the same time. It actually worked out that we had to leave it for nearly an hour whilst they were still installing these lights before we could come back in. So what would be the best thing to improve with the space is actually when different companies are coming in, and actually consider the students and those as companies or as practitioners to perform feat or perform inside the space. The lighting company needs to come in first, then the set, then the camera operators, not all in one sort of block. Particularly on the second day, the lighting companies were there from 9 and we got there at 10, and the lighting companies left at 11, so they were still there and over an hour overlapping when we were there, and it only really was structured to support the film students in that space. They were then free to open up at that point and then move in. Before then they could set up whilst we were setting up, but set up back from us, and how they were working as well was a lot more given to them being able to work in the space rather than being able to work with us. However, it is something understandable, as they were the course that were actually paying for the work to be done, and they were the ones that were guiding what the project was from the start. I think I'm going to end it here on actually what the facilities were, and do another conclusion video or a reflection video on what the staff and what the actual structure of teachers, students, and inside our practical group of practitioners, or in our student group of practitioners, was like in another video, as this one is already quite long. So for now, I'll say that's it, and I'll record another one just now for the rest of the conclusion.